This is the next session of our Mars webinar. It's Thursday, June 24th, 2021. And as always, last Thursday on the month at 9 o'clock German time. What are we doing, Stefan?
Lutz, what are we doing last Thursday? Obviously, our webinar.
Our webinar, of course. Yeah, our webinar about the topics market access and reimbursement here in Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. My name is Lutz Wurmer, and I will be your moderator tonight. So just before we come to our topic, 1 year DiGAs, Germany, is the Garden of Eden, let me introduce Mars. Mars is the German-speaking market access for your topics. So we cover all the topics for pricing and reimbursement strategies here in the healthcare market for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. We also provide you with health economics data, and of course, with the reimbursement submissions, all the documents you need for the Federal Joint Committee in Germany for the DiGA application, which we are talking about tonight, about the Swiss BAG or the Austrian Hauptverband. We all know that really well, and provide you or helping you with finishing this data. And also, of course, I mean, when you provide DiGAs and as also with the AMNOG process, right? You have price negotiations, and then we provide you also with the negotiation support. And we have something really cool. We have our virtual reality bootcamp. So check it out if you have an upcoming price negotiation. And I mean, you know, we have all vaccinated, so could be if Delta virus is not too bad, then the Delta coronavirus is not too bad. Then, like in October, right? It could be that we are all like in face-to-face price negotiations again, like we have before. So be prepared for that. Okay. But yeah, no, but as what about tonight? As always, right? Feel free to ask questions after the presentation. We will also have time for your presentation. You can use either here the chat function in Zoom or the question and answer function to raise your questions or comments. And normally the first question is, will you provide the slides and the video afterwards? Yes, of course we will do. You find all on our website, which is www.marketaccess-pricingstrategy.de, and there you find also the last webinars on that. Here actually you find also like wonderful webinars, like the last one from our good friend, Professor Jürgen Wasem, who's the head of the arbitration board, the former head of the AMNOG arbitration board. And he was here, and we had a really, really good webinar talking about that all arbitration board and who are the winners and the losers, and what are the expected like outcomes of that, right? And what are the problems of the arbitration board? Because you have to come to a solution, right? Which somehow everybody's happy at the end, right?
And just to mention as well, Lutz, right? I mean, Professor Wasem is obviously the former head of the drug arbitration board, but he's the current actual head of the DiGA arbitration board. So he might as well now play a crucial role in the near future when we're discussing about the DiGAs.
Yeah, exactly. So he's, you know, great academic guy and really also consistent in his methods and stuff. So it was really a good webinar we had last time. So perfect. Yeah. So, and then we had also like the one with Willy Wellner about the market access in hospitals, right? And the 10 years of AMNOG with our good friend, Professor Hammerschmidt. So lots of things. I mean, the 10 years of AMNOG, that's actually a relevant one, right? The closer now the elections are coming. Oh, that's like a really something really interesting topics coming up. Also, what happens to the orphan drug, right? I mean, in Germany, they also have like an additional benefit given by law, but you know, what happens? No one knows actually after the election. So, but there's a lot of pressure on the system. So we really expect some changes. Yes. And well, if you don't have it, well, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then you will also get notified when are the next new videos uploaded there. And then also, our presenters and discussions today is Dr. Stefan Walzer. So Stefan, we all know you. You're the CEO of Mars and the president and the founder. And it's really good to have you here. Stefan Walzer is a health economist with a long career at Roche. And welcome to Weil am Rhein.
Thank you, Lutz. Welcome to Tübingen.
Yeah, and then also we want to have actually our good friend Ariane Schenk from the Manufacturer Association Bitkom, so from Bitkom Health here. But we have a problem. Ariane, she's a trained nurse, and she had a medical incident with some of her people around, and now she's sitting somewhere in an emergency unit, right? So that's life. Our best wishes to you, Ariane, and from our side. So sorry you can't hear, but it's understandable. To the poor person next to you, get soon better, right? Our best wishes to you. Yeah, Stefan, that's life. So it's just the two of us tonight, right?
Yeah, what a pity, right?
Yeah,
I think Ariane could have also shown a lot of insights. I mean, she's very close, not only to the companies, but also to the physicians and to other stakeholders, including the politicians. But I think I have just briefly spoken with her just a few minutes before the webinar, and I'm pretty much sure that we will have her in a future webinar again, and then she will give the insights what we were planning for tonight as well.
So the audience, sorry for that, but we will give you an update also. Maybe Ariane could give us like a short statement or send us a postcard or something, right? We can forward to our
Yes.
audience here. I see the numbers are dropping. There one is Ariane. No, I'm just joking. Okay. Okay. So let's just start about the 1 year of the 1 year of Garden Eden, right? Yeah, about the apple and the snake and stuff. So 1 year DiGAs in Germany, digital health applications here. Is Germany really the Garden of Eden now in Europe, or how is it?
Yeah, thank you, Lutz. I think thank you also for the introduction. And again, welcome everybody at this month's webinar. So 1 year DiGAs in Germany. So it's more a question, I think, than a real kind of argument that this might potentially be the Garden of Eden. But let's just have a look how the DiGA kind of process really looks like, and also what and in which ways, obviously, the various digital health applications have been launched and applied in Germany in the last 12 months. So just generally, to start with a very broad kind of introduction, I think for most of you listening, I think you're aware, and that is probably also why you are joining the webinar, or now maybe as well watching the video afterwards. Germany is a large market, at least in Europe, and is also very attractive from the different kind of perspectives. Just a few kind of snapshots, because we have spoken a lot of times already on and around Germany, but we have never really, let's say, spoken about the various kind of, let's say, players in a more kind of broader view. We still have a bit more than 100 statutory health insurance funds, that's the public health insurance funds. We have also 50 private health insurances, and direct linking maybe the left-hand side with the right-hand side. We have roughly 90% of people being insured in the public health system. It's a totally different system than, for example, in the US, just in case somebody is also watching from the US. But as you see, I think it's a primary market, let's call it, because you have the biggest kind of size and number of patients and population then in that market. We have around 2,000 hospitals. Also here, I think Lutz has already introduced that a couple of minutes ago. We have had a quite nice webinar already as well on inpatient reimbursement. And you see there, as we have also introduced at that time, we have also various, let's call it sponsorships, right? Basically the kind of holders of the various hospitals, which is, yeah, probably around a third for each. So we have public, non-profit, and also private kind of health hospitals, which might also have had obviously an impact on the various kind of pathways. But I think what is even more important, we have also now more and more digital players, not only with the digital health applications, as we have already seen, but also a couple of other important changes, and call it maybe platforms. DiGA we will cover obviously in a second. And you see also on the right-hand side, when you have a look on the map, that we have, let's say, quite good, let's say, density on the population across the country. So recent regulatory changes, and I think we have discussed also internally whether we can and want basically to say that all of those changes which have also happened, especially now in the last 2 to 3 years, not so you see not only around COVID, but also already started beforehand, might potentially, we could even say will potentially propel Germany from paper chaos into a more digitalized future. Paper chaos, you could maybe also have said, maybe the fax machines that rather than paper chaos. I think we still have a lot and probably too many fax machines, but a couple of important things here, especially when we're also speaking about digital health applications. If you have a look on number one, it sounds a bit odd maybe to one or the other listening here. Doctors are allowed to prescribe medical apps. I think that was not that odd maybe 2 years ago, right? I mean, medical apps were used here and there, but really rarely, and were clearly not, let's say, refundable, so reimbursed basically by the various health insurances in Germany. So that is now, we'll cover in a couple of minutes as well, one of the core drivers. But we have as well a couple of further things which are now really have been driven basically also by the Ministry of Health in the last 4 years. I think the whole thing basically starts with the more digital communication also between the physician and the patient, but also within hospitals, for example. We have now also a clear, not only a plan, so it's not, let's say, the next kind of Berlin airport. I think the electronic health record is the second Berlin airport, basically. So really a big delay already. But now I think we have it in the also in the law, and we'll also get penalties if, for example, physicians would not use it after a given kind of a time frame. Also important is maybe around that is maybe number 7, telehealth consultations might and are becoming probably the norm. To be honest, I've only seen that in theory. When I was last at a couple of physicians, nothing urgent, but I was really looking. Yes, I saw a computer, but they have just looked at me after I asked for a video consultation opportunity if I was coming basically from Mars. So health innovation, financially supported. You might know already the Innovation Fund, where we also get 200 million euros per year since years already, as well as further funding. So you see a lot of things have happened now around digitalization in healthcare in Germany. But now let's also focus on the digital health pathway. So a couple of different things before we come and focus clearly on the here highlighted in green, the DiGAs, which is called digital health applications. Just important, we're coming to the definition as well in a couple of seconds probably. We're not only speaking about here about apps, right? It's just more in German, it's Anwendung, which is broader than just a pure app, right? So you'll see that with the definition, just something keeping in mind. If the DiGA pathway would not be possible for your digital health, let's call it maybe solution, then there are still other kind of pathways, right? There are the standard pathways on the left-hand side of the blue boxes with the inpatient, the outpatient reimbursement. For example, potentially even a method evaluation. Just keep in mind, especially if you maybe have a digital health solution as a medical device, risk class 2B or 3, then it might be more a method evaluation. And also the kind of still a bit of the question mark on the monitoring tools, for example, and obviously everything used as well in the hospital setting. If none of these work, or what we a lot of times just say, if it just takes too long of time, because obviously you need to, as well as an industry, to create some cash, you could also go into the kind of direction of selective contracting or direct kind of contracts with different kind of stakeholders, including the health insurances in Germany. But now switch and now focus really on the digital health application, as the topic has already said. So starting very scientific maybe, how are DiGAs defined? It sounds a bit odd, but for those who have already been in contact, for example, with the BfArM, who are then defining and deciding basically if your solution is a DiGA, it's not really just odd and a pure scientific definition, but it's really important. So really have a deep look, and we'll have a look. I think the risk class is probably not an issue. I think you directly know that after your kind of regulatory pathway. Is it a risk class 1 or is it a risk class 2A? Then it's at least the first tick mark, basically the tick box already done. Then the second one is the main function relies mainly on digital technologies. Sounds strange? Not really. We also had products basically on our table where, let's say, the main digital technology around that from the client's perspective was just collecting data. And just collecting data in the way that this was just as a kind of database, then it's not really a technology, right? So you need to have something else behind, right? Like kind of analysis, like an algorithm behind. I think that's important also then to show to the BfArM. But then I think we're coming to the more two, I think, important components here, right? One is the purpose and the other one is the functionality. The purpose basically means that it needs to support the insured persons, and this also mainly, at least mainly in the outpatient care by the service providers, and it needs to be basically used at least also by the patient or primarily by the patient. So this is the kind of, let's say, difficulty, especially when it comes to the functionalities. You see that monitoring is put into brackets. So if it's just a pure monitoring tool for the physician, then it's most of the times not a DiGA, right? So that's also important. Keep in mind when you plan, for example, your DiGA and or when you have a digital health solution in your hands to see basically where it can be used and also to see if the DiGA pathway might even be applicable to you. So after that, right, if we think you go to the BfArM, BfArM says, yes, this is a DiGA, then obviously the whole kind of, let's say, I would say the fun part, hopefully then also starts, right? Because you want to go and launch the product on the market, patients should use it, physicians should utilize it, and you obviously should also create, as a company, obviously, some cash as well. So starting with the consultation is a lot of times, I think, a very good first move. There are a lot of further questions. We have just said, is it a DiGA? Yes, no. Most of the cases, I think it's not really a big question, but if you anyway need to, for example, contact and consult the BfArM, then just add it as well in there. A lot of times, the bigger question is obviously on the evidence base. Is the evidence base enough? Are the documentations enough what we have? And a couple of further things, especially then here also on the IT, for example, let's call it infrastructure, especially also when we discuss and think about the safety, what we also have in a couple of minutes here. So just if you think a bit about time to reimbursement, right? The BfArM decision, the BfArM decides on your case after the complete submission is available at the BfArM within 3 months. So this is a very rapid kind of process in a way. After they have decided positively, the product, so your DiGA is then reimbursed on the German market, meaning also some of you might know that from the drug area, basically, we're including a free pricing period, meaning that you have a free price. So the price you basically put into the system needs to be paid by all German health insurance funds when the patient gets the prescription. We're coming to that kind of loop, how that also looks like, but this is, I think, a very important kind of point. Then we have the price negotiations, which we'll cover probably also a bit closer in detail on the next slide. And also important, if there's a need for an adjustment of the outpatient coding, so the EBM, what some of you might already know, then this is automatically already being changed. So there's one underlying general code, which could be used by any DiGA prescription for any DiGA descriptions. And then there might be also dependent a bit on the resources needed from the physicians, from the nursing, or from any other stakeholder in the subsidiary health insurance system, then there might be then as well adaptation from the EBM's perspective. And finally, obviously, when you don't agree to a price in the price negotiation with the head association of the health insurance funds, then it might be that this case is going to the arbitration board. And Lutz ever also just mentioned, just last month, we had Professor Walzer, who is now the new head of the arbitration board in that area as well at our webinar. So maybe also worthwhile to jump in there because I think a lot of those findings might also be applicable to the DiGA case. Okay, so I mean, I think a lot of times, obviously, I mean, what you have maybe as well recognized already, the decision by the BfArM is not in the way that the DiGA is automatically being granted, permanently be included in the directory, but more preliminary, meaning that the evidence base may be not sufficient or maybe not sufficient enough. What does that mean? This basically means that you need to run a so-called German DiGA study, which needs to be run in a German or a German-like. So we're coming back to what Lutz already said. A DACH study might also be fine because it's just assumed that the Austrian, the Swiss, and the German environment is very close to each other, obviously also from a language and a lot of times I think also from a cultural perspective. So this is fine, but you need to run it basically and normally within 12 months. So this is the first plan. Overall, there's the absolute maximum number of 12 months for possible extension, but you need to apply for that every time, right? You cannot just go and say, my DiGA study runs for 24 months. No, the plan's for 12 months, and then you could extend it for reasons you all know when you have already run various clinical studies. Important here, please keep in mind, you need to have a prospectively planned and written protocol, a prospectively written statistical analysis plan, and a prospectively written, and sorry, not prospectively written, but then also, sorry, a full clinical study report, obviously, after you have the data available, but based on the protocol and the analysis plan, which was then prospectively being done. And then the decision could be done by the BfArM in either ways, a permanent registration, which I think will be the case if the study was positive, or obviously rejection. And this, I think, we have not yet seen, obviously, because we've just 1 year now since the launch of the whole kind of law. But I think if the study is negative, then you're obviously ending up potentially in a rejection.
Yeah, let me add there. I mean, we know from our audience here also, don't be too easy with that evidence. BfArM is, yeah, really picky on the data. We will see that also later. And you also mentioned, right, to really calculate here the time. I mean, you have to provide the data, but then you need the time to perform the trial, but then also you need the time also to provide like the right nice data like the CSR to the BfArM, or to publish the data in a journal and stuff like that, right? So be aware of that.
Yeah, very good point, Lutz. Yes, absolutely. Okay, but I mean, let's move a bit from, let's say, the process and also obviously check on the requirements, right? Some principal requirements, I think most of you might know already: security, functionality, the quality of the medical device, data protection, and data security according to state of the art. That's, I think, quite fine because we're speaking and discussing about a digital solution. And then there's the big plus, we put it in blue. So it's not the red cross, but the blue cross. We have the two kind of, let's say, I would say the two options, right? One is for the permanent application, then you need to have a positive care effect, which needs to be proven either by a medical benefit and or by an improvement of patient relevant process. We'll see, I think, how this looks currently like when looking at the already 17 positive decisions by the BfArM. Or you have the preliminary application where you need to have, let's say, kind of call it plausible justification. And I think the plausible, I think, Lutz, we discussed already a lot of times on that, right? Sometimes even the results out of a pilot study could be sufficient for that plausibility, but it needs to be checked beforehand, right? So it also needs to be shown that the DiGA is working. So just a kind of pure, let's say, argumentation, what the DiGA should do is not enough. You need to have somehow some kind of data in order to be in that pathway for the preliminary application that you can then also later on basically show that on a scientific evaluation, meaning the study we have just mentioned a couple of minutes ago.
Yes, Stefan, totally agree with that point. I mean, just if you have there like run a systematic literature review and say, well, look, it's in theory it's working, right? No, you have to show that somehow your app is already working, that you show data, right? And we see that later up in the preliminary ones, where how they show data. I mean, some of them performed already RCTs, but not in Germany, so you had to transfer it, or they had like small Anwendungsbeobachtung, what we call in Germany, right? You to just show them and analyze some data or real world data and stuff. So we'll see that later, but really take care on that. It's not just a theoretical proof.
Exactly. That's perfect. So Declaration of the positive care effect. Exactly. I think what you have already just said, right? You need to specify a patient group. That means an indication. That's also important, obviously, when you plan your clinical study. So if you theoretically, let's say, it could be applied in a given disease area, which is very broad, you need to show basically the benefit in a given patient group, which then needs to be also shown in the clinical study. So the evidence that the DiGA has positive care effect can only be provided for that defined patient groups or the several defined patient groups. And you see that also when you check where the different already agreed and applied DiGAs are used. Finally, the definition and the delimitation of this patient group must be based on one or more indications according to the ICD-10, right? So you see already, it needs to be proven already in a very evidence-based medicine direction, and this needs to as well to be then applied in the clinical studies you have either already run, so which could potentially fall into the kind of direction for permanent acceptance, or obviously, which then needs to be run as a kind of DiGA study. So any recommendations in terms of study locations? I think what I have already said earlier, I think generally the studies must be conducted in Germany. Why? I mean, you see also a bit later on, I mean, when you have a digital health application in your hand, right, the patient needs to read something. A lot of times it's basically a kind of educational parts around it, or some kind of psychological support, quality of life, etc., etc. So you have a lot of, let's say, language which needs to be applied, right? So even if you have shown, for example, that your DiGA has worked, for example, in another country, in another environment, you need to prove that this can be transferred from that country into the German care context. So that's very important, and that is also important, and especially to show basically, and for example, that the different treatment arms, so also the comparator in your, that's called a broad study, is very similar to the German situation. And a lot of times what you can also take as a basis for that is then also the comparison of the guidelines. So that's very important. Generally in Germany, there are the excuse, or let's say the kind of opportunities with the DACH countries. And if you have run a study outside of those countries, and especially outside of Germany, then you need to, first of all, check whether you could potentially say, the care environment is very similar, also the follow-up care, for example, and hence we claim still that we would like to go into the permanent direction, but check that as well beforehand with the BfArM in a consultation. So any further specific requirements in terms of study types, study designs? I think generally, I think it needs to be comparative. It needs to be basically pre-specified beforehand. Case control studies, retrospective cohort studies, or intra-individual comparisons are, I would say, generally also possible, but only as evidence package. So you cannot just go in with a case control study and can basically claim that this is enough and sufficient for your, let's say, full application. But if you have a full evidence package, then it could potentially be enough. And also really, what I want to again stress here, go into the discussion with the BfArM. Also, when you think about your kind of full clinical study reports, I mean, a lot of times they are getting a bit more flexible, I would say, also in terms of duration of the study and also the various endpoints, dependent obviously on the indications we're speaking here about. Generally not accepted as sole evidence, so individually, so only this as an evidence are expert opinions, expert reports, or purely descriptive studies such as case reports, case series, or cross-sectional studies. So a bit of IT requirements, just keep in mind, there is a full list, so there are 2 annexes basically available and in the application of around 150 detailed questions. The good thing is a lot of those questions can be answered, should be answered with yes and no. And if it's no, then you need to have a clear rationale behind. But it's just as well something you need to have your IT experts very close to you, that they can also go through it. And if potentially even needed, as well reprogram some of those parts here. So now move a bit, again, a bit further, not only from the process, but now also a bit from the theory into the practicality, right? How does the BfArM directory looks like? All available, just check it out. You have the the website below. But I think even more important is obviously what is in there, right? So which kind of products. So 17 DiGAs or apps have already been included. This is quite brand new. All DiGAs are medical devices class 1. So that's maybe as well something important keeping in mind. And the various disease areas you see basically on the right-hand side. A bit more than half of those include mental and behavioral disorders. I think for me, it makes a lot of sense because I think the kind of practical, the theory behind it, the application behind it from a medical practice perspective, I think is already given. And I think some of that could be, let's say, more easily, let's call it, be transferred also into the digital health area, right? Then you have around 70% around the nervous system, and then you have a good split between a lot of those other kind of areas. You see, it's just 17. Just keep it in mind, because for some of you, it might just say, really be the kind of impression, it's just 17. But I think we have also checked what has happened in the AMNOG process in the first year. I think in the first AMNOG year, I think there were also just around 16 drugs which were assessed by the GBA. So this is, I think, overall a quite good number. And I think even more, and I think, again, thank you, Lutz, to put that all together here. There were overall 81 applications in that 1 year, which were all obviously assessed by the BfArM, and a lot more obviously around the consultations, which are not publicly available. 58 of those were going for preliminary inclusion, 23 for permanent inclusion, 25 of those 81 are still in process, so they're still within the BfArM evaluation. 17 are positively decided, as already just said, 5 permanently, 12 preliminary accepted, 4 were rejected, and 35 were withdrawn. Withdrawn, just keep in mind, just 4 rejected, 35 withdrawn. The BfArM is more and still a regulatory body, right? So if they see, let's say, the tendency that a product is not being accepted for any kind of reasons, they basically will tell you beforehand and give you as well the choices to either be rejected or to withdraw now the case and potentially then resubmit it shortly after again. So that might as well maybe explain a bit the 35 withdrawn.
Yeah, let me add to that rejection. That's actually also given in the law. I mean, when you're rejected, you cannot apply in the next 12 months, right?
Yeah.
So if you actually, and some of them actually were applying for a permanent registration, or I'm sure that a lot of them are applying. And then there was like, pushed back by the BfArM and saying, well, no, we don't accept this data for a permanent registration. And therefore you can either withdraw by yourself or be rejected. So we know what we would do, right? So
yes, you can comment like that, Lutz.
Yeah.
So perfect. So 5 DiGAs are included with the permanent listing. I think what you have seen there. I think important is that all of those 5 have at least one randomized controlled trial as a basis. Some even have multiple RCT data available. I think interesting is also, because that is also a lot of question what we get a lot of times, that the range of number of patients within those RCTs vary quite hugely. I think the lowest number in those studies was 56 and goes up to more than 1,000. The mean was a bit more than 370, but I think that's still showing that ultimately it's the study design itself and not so much the sample size, but also obviously keep in mind, you need to as well show a significant benefit with those few patients. So if you see a big benefit, then you can always as well go with a lower or larger kind of benefit. You would also go with a lower sample size, because then it might also be that the results might still be significant. And all of those have proven a medical benefit on the improvement of the health status. So moving from those 5 to the 12 DiGAs, which are included preliminary, those are now running RCTs. A lot of those had basically a bit of a, I think we put it quite nice together as a kind of evidence package, right? But a lot of those also used observational data or even just the pilot study data, as Lutz has just mentioned as well beforehand. And also the range is quite going down in terms of number of patients, between 20 and 70 patients. But again, it's important to say just they start with the preliminary listing. They need as well to submit already a kind of evidence kind of plan, and hence they are now all running an RCT or are shortly before running an RCT to prove their efficacy then for a later permanent listing. Yeah. 11 of those have claimed the medical benefit through the improvement of the patient relevant process, to the patient benefit, and only one claimed it through the patient relevant process as well. Lutz, you want to say something on that as well?
Yes, of course. Let me add some details in here. When we look at that data, so when you apply for a preliminary study, of course you need a systematic literature review about your topic. So what's there? Well, your pilot study just has to show a clear hint that there will be a positive effect of it. Otherwise, they will not let it go through the process. The BfArM will reject it. So if there's no clear hint that your app is not working, and you have to keeping really in mind the clock, right? I mean, the clock is ticking. 12 months is a really short period, right? I mean, you have to prepare the study protocol, and probably you just start before actually, or when you're turning in the application, then you should actually start with the RCT, right? And in the consultation before approve the study protocol with the BfArM that they were gonna accept the data, right? You produce. That's also a good point there. Yeah. And it's actually interesting here that when we see the claim of the medical benefit, that 11 claimed the pure medical benefit, and some also claimed like the improvement of the patient relevant processes, but only one claimed only a patient relevant process itself and with no medical benefit.
Yeah, and maybe that has also to do, I think, when you plan a clinical study, you normally have the patient benefit or the medical benefit in your mind, right? I think that's the normal kind of, let's say, direction when you plan an RCT in the health area. But I think the patient relevant process could also be an important drive, maybe also a bit in the future, right? I mean, maybe that might also be something interesting for DiGAs in the future and the evidence for that.
And let me add one interesting thing about that all evidence point is that, I mean, by the law, you don't need an RCT, right? It could be also like a real life data. It's actually written in the law that this is possible. But in reality, it looks at the end that all DiGAs are coming out now, the permanent listings and the preliminary listings, all that the BfArM is requiring an RCT for the proof of the evidence. That's pretty interesting.
That is a very good comment, Lutz. I fully agree. I think that is also where we were, let's say, already discussing before, even before the first DiGAs were approved, how this would really look like. And it looks that we are probably, let's call it right. I think we're all expecting RCTs because I think a lot of people are coming from the drug area, especially from the decision makers. So yeah, let's just move in the other kind of direction, right? From the evidence into the price. So these are the prices before the price negotiation, which is really important. And we see already good and important signs that I think especially the payer sides want to really drop those prices significantly down. The first DiGA has now started the price negotiation. Let's just see how this will really look like in the next 6 and 12 months, and obviously as well beyond that. But the current kind of, let's say, prices vary currently between a bit more than 200 euros to 740 euros. Between, I mean, you see the kind of range here, right? With a mean of 440 euros. And important here also is that all DiGAs have selected a 90 days reimbursement period. Here, important, keeping in mind that you could even choose it, right? You could choose from the list of 30, 60, and 90 days, or even lifelong. Just maybe for some of you who might maybe or who are maybe now thinking of launching into the DiGA pathway in the future, maybe take as well the different kind of, let's say, length of the reimbursement period as a potential negotiation mass as well. I mean, that might be maybe as well something interesting strategically, not directly, let's say, fulfilling maybe what the payers want, because they want anyway, first of all, to negotiate. So also bring you in the kind of right, let's say, order that you have as well some mass to discuss. Okay, coming to probably the last part, and I think this is also, it looks a bit messy potentially, and I think there were a lot of discussions how to bring that really into life. But if you just follow that, let's say, the kind of little bullets where you have the numbers in there. So you have to start here with the number 1. And just important, read what is in there. It's still a paper description, right? We have digital pathway and we still have a paper prescription in your hands, which is sometimes a bit difficult to understand. Yes, something like that, you can hear it, but this will be changed. I mean, as already said, I think there's now a big push, and I think in 2 years time we don't have any paper prescriptions anymore.
2 years, yes.
Yes,
for sure.
exactly. And this also explains a bit, obviously, the kind of process, right? You still think, right? We're speaking about digital health application. You could pick up your phone and get your code for your DiGA. You could fax it. You could send it via snail post. That's also still possible. But a lot of, let's say, health insurance now also have their own apps where you can simply, let's say, take a kind of picture, load it up, and then this is basically really kind of fast process. So that is then the kind of pathway from number 2, because you need to have the prescription with the health insurance company, with your individual health insurance fund, and they then, let's say, as well, create a so-called code, and the code is then being made available to the patient, again, either via snail post, via telephone, or also via the app, obviously, and then the patient can use that code in order to download the DiGA by entering the code, because that code is then later on important for you as a DiGA company, because with that code, you can basically claim your kind of reimbursement to the health insurance company, sorry, that you can also get your money, let's say, back as well. And I think that's the whole kind of process. You see, it looks a bit more messy than it finally is, but it's just something keeping in mind, especially as you need to program it appropriately when you think where to offer it, for example, which app stores or on which website, right? And how to, let's say, also work with that code which is then being provided by the sickness funds, that you also get your money finally back. Okay, I think then we would have had our special guest Ariane, but let's you said it already. I think she will come back, promised, and she will then also get further insights from one of the largest industry association, the Bitkom. So we can already jump into the conclusion, and then obviously looking forward to the questions. So finally, I still believe that the DiGA pathway is a really attractive and rapid market access process. I think it's very interesting now to also see that also, let's say, outside of Germany, a lot of other systems are really looking how the Germans are really doing that. Belgium, by the way, has also a very similar kind of process. A lot of people do not know that, but just keep in mind that I think this is really, I think, a quite nice and rapid process. So DiGA definition is very important for you here. And then thinking, obviously, which kind of route to go, permanent or preliminary, and then quite clearly also thinking which kind of evidence base you have. And I would always say start with the BfArM consultation, because that's the most important and easiest pathway for a discussion. And just keep also in mind here, the consultation could even be done in English. The consultation to the BfArM, so the request, but also the meeting actually could be in English. So this is also making life a bit easier, especially in those early days for example, also kind of startups in that area. Lutz, time for questions.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you, Stefan. Here, wonderful presentation. Yes, we have plenty of questions. So the one questions actually we actually answered already. Can I reapply for the 12-month study period in case I get rejected the first time? Yes, as we stated, the BfArM actually will tell you that they're gonna be rejected, and you have the gun on your breast, and then you just say, okay, maybe I just withdraw by myself. And strategically.
Exactly. I think that's the important thing, Lutz. Exactly. I think if the BfArM tells you, and they will, it's not the GBA, right? It's another. Still think about the BfArM is a registration body, right? And they are thinking like that, right? Like the emails, right? They know that, and they like that kind of contact with the industry as well. So if they see the tendency that the product might be rejected, they will tell you. And then, as Lutz already said, think strategically about it. If you want to maybe withdraw it and then come back, or if you really let it be rejected.
Yeah, and that's actually the point what also some of the audience is writing. Well, what's about the quality of the DiGAs? Well, the BfArM is a registration body, right? They just tell you it's applicable or not we're gonna accept it. We prove that it's a safe DiGA, right? The data security. They prove that there is evidence or there's a hint of evidence, right? So it's working, but they don't judge how good it is working. So there's no rating like with the unlock process at the end, where you say it's a considerable added benefit or a significant added benefit. And that's really the difference here between the BfArM process and the unlock process. Yeah, and some more questions here about the definitions of a DiGA. So DiGA or no DiGA, it's really like Shakespeare, right? So I was asking, how will they categorize a VR treatment of an outpatient supervised by a doctor in the hospital clinic? Oh, that's a good question. We recommend you doing here a BfArM consultation. You can contact us. We got you through. It's really easy, like formula you have to fill out, and I think there's one DiGA already there about Fiona who are using actually VR glasses, right? They're shipping
yes,
VR
exactly.
glasses.
I think there's one which has already been categorized as a DiGA. Obviously, the kind of important question is, what do you really mean by supervised, right? Because ultimately the VR treatment needs to be done in the outpatient setting by the patient himself or herself, right? But then it's still the kind of cool question, is really a kind of monitoring, or is it rather that the patient would basically use the kind of VR treatment, and in case there's an emergency or a question, if the patient would be actively, let's say, going out to the doctor, then it's probably more, I would tend to say it's more DiGA. But it's if the physician is, let's say, in the move, right, in the kind of, let's say, driver's seat, then I would rather say it's probably more tendency that it's not a DiGA. But as Lutz said, I think I would just simply discuss it with the BfArM. So absolutely agree with you. Not being Shakespeare, but
yeah, I definitely gray area, right? So right, could be not. So, and we're not the BfArM, so BfArM decides, and we can make some points here, but they have also like see other points where they say, well, it's more a DiGA or it's not a DiGA. So yes, and then about, you mentioned here, the next year it's getting political here. We have elections in October. So that is really like coming up here. And the question is, how and what changes do you expect to take place in the DiGA process this year?
Yeah, let's just see. I think there were a lot of, let's say, small changes throughout the year already, right? You saw that also in the guide by the BfArM. I think we have now just, let's say, received the final price negotiation frame, which has just been finished. What is that, 6-8 weeks ago? So we're still waiting for the first outcomes of the price negotiations now in the next couple of very few months. So I think that's just keeping something as well like that in mind. I mean, what we'll also get is the so-called DiPA, which is more the digitale Pflegeanwendung, which is more kind of digital care applications, which is maybe probably following the same kind of pathway as the DiGAs. But to be honest, I would not really expect any change to the DiGA process at the moment, because I think it's still new. And I think probably where I'll probably more see the kind of bigger impact, Lutz, you mentioned that already in your introduction, is probably in the AMNOG area. I think for the digital health applications, not yet. We need to see, I think, first of all, how the negotiations go, because this might also then drive a bit further what kind of changes might also come in the future from a political side.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure on the price negotiations, and it's really depending on how also the head association of the state health insurance, right, will react on that and then put political pressure on it. And also what's the feedback about that? But that's also what our good friend Sebastian is actually giving us. He was here just quoting a recent survey of a Germany State Health Insurance Head Association. Insured persons, only 36% said that their health insurer provided them with strong information about digital support services. Well, that's a clear statement. Only 1/3 said, well, my health insurance company knows what they're talking about when we were talking about digital services, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's also a question.
They're probably all insured at the Techniker Krankenkasse, right? Which is like the leading one, and which is the name tells you that.
Yeah, I mean, I can just, I would put it probably into perspective, right? I think I I would assume that maybe a year or 1.5 years ago, I think this 36% would have been probably significantly lower already. So I think it is already on the rise. I think that's number one. I think the second one is obviously also, there's maybe a bit of a bias in there as well, right? When I think about, let's say, my mother or my parents-in-law or so, let's say they're not really confident of using digital health applications. So they would just simply say, no, I'm not really well informed, right? So I think it might also change a bit. I think at the end of the day, I think the whole kind of area is on the move, and I think it's on the right, let's say, move, and we need it. I think when you see the scarcity of physicians, of nurses, of care providers already now, we need to have digital health applications also in care homes, also for elderly. So I think that is something we need to really invest, not only money, but in time, but I think also generally, let's say, around resources.
Yeah, and I think we should really give credits to our health minister, Jens Spahn, right? Thank you, Jens, for this wonderful law. I think that's really pushy at something really new in Germany. So thank you for that. So yeah, we should give him credits for that, right? Yeah, I mean,
that out of your mouth, Lutz, and I know that you're not a conservative voter, if I can say that.
Yeah, of course. We'll see what's happening in October, but he made a nice job with that. I mean, it's still like some things going on and stuff. So, but it's good. Okay. Yeah, actually, that were our questions for tonight. There are some more, but we try to give you some answers after that, and also send you some interesting report. Actually, there's a nice report actually coming out from the Bundesamt for Security Information, Bundes BSI, federal, how do you say, Federal Bureau of Information Services and Security, about the data security in apps, and they looked at all the Google App Stores and our Play Store and the apps and how the data security was. So it's really interesting product. So, but it's time. That's life coming to the end. Here's our next topics. Actually, in July we have our good expert here, Professor Dr. Uwe Walzer from the University of Freiburg. German elections ahead, right? We were talking about green and black and Jamaica and the German coalition and all that constellation, and what will have that on the implication on the healthcare system and also here on our market access, right? And then in August, it's getting hot, right? It's hot summer. We have Bibiane Schulte-Bosse here. She's a great person. She's a tough leader and a tough negotiator, and she's a lawyer. And she does also help us with, or actually, she does the price negotiations here in the ABNO process. Now, I'm sure she also does that in the DiGA process. And we talk about James Bond and Bruce Willis, what she's preferring, Live and Let Die or Die Hard, right? That's about the price negotiation. And then in September, just before we come to the German elections, we come to Austria, we go here Mozart and Sissi and all the Sacher cake, and we talk about actually the pragmatic reimbursement pathways in Austria, right? Ja, machen wir schon irgendwie. So, Dr. Thorsten Pesky here, our good friend from Austria, and we talk about the Austrian market access. Yeah, that was it. Thank you, Stefan, for tonight. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Our best wishes again to Ariane, where we are on the emergency station. Our best wishes to you from this time. And then to our lovely audience, thank you all for joining us tonight. It was also a pleasure for us. You will find this video also on YouTube. So don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel. Stay tuned here for our next webinars. I'm Lutz Vollmer. This is Stefan Walzer, and that was our Mars webinar. Good night and good luck. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.